up. What y'all doing?
Tell your friend to come out too. Hands up. How'd you just get in?
He a realtor.
Turn around. Till we can confirm. Turn around. Did you use a key? Where's the key at? Alright. Where at?
Only word.
Okay. Have a seat.
We was white, they wouldn't have did that.
I don't give a if you're white or black. We're doing our job
I didn't say you wasn't.
It's in your pocket or your car?
But that's bullshit, though.
Do you have like ID on you? Which pocket, sir? You've got lots of pockets. Turn around.
Stretch your legs. There's two
Wait,
guys.
Yeah, we would.
Because
you ride along, you know what we do, huh? You know how we do our job, don't you?
Got between his crutch and stuff for weapons, but he's got an ID and he's got realty cards on. You got into the key box?
Yeah.
We got called and told that you guys forced entry, which is why. Yeah, and he's got realty cards on.
Although Mr. Brannigan's 911 call did offer the officers reasonable suspicion to conduct an investigatory detention, it did not grant the officers the probable cause needed to conduct a search of Mr. Isham's pockets. The doctrine of the Terry frisk grants officers the authority to conduct a pat-down search of individuals they suspect may be armed and dangerous, but the Terry frisk is extremely limited in its scope and only applies to the exterior of an individual. An officer cannot automatically frisk everyone lawfully stopped under the Terry doctrine. In addition to reasonable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot, the officer must also be able to articulate reasonable suspicion that the suspect is armed and dangerous. Officer safety alone will not justify a frisk. The officer must be able to articulate why officer safety was an issue and exactly what risk or danger to the officer or others existed. Officer Valentino began her search by going directly into the pockets of Mr. Isham without probable cause to do so.
What about the little, shouldn't it be like in a little...
pockets.
Okay, well, I can't find it. Turn around, sir.
It is not until a full search of the residence and further consultation with Sergeant Titus Fillmore is completed that Officer Knox instructs Officer Valentino to remove the handcuffs from Mr. Isham and Mr. Edwards.
Sorry about that, sir. We can only go by what's reported to us, okay?
I had it in my
Yeah, I couldn't find it, so...
No, not yet.
Just left it inside.
After releasing Mr. Isham and Mr. Edwards, the officers left the scene without making an arrest or investigating further. On July 15, 2019, Mr. Isham and Mr. Edwards filed a lawsuit naming the city of Cincinnati as well as Officer Valentino, Officer Knox, and Officer Pete. The complaint alleged that the officers violated the Fourth Amendment rights of the two men and that the city failed to properly train its officers on the constitutional rights of individuals. Approximately 3 days after the complaint was filed, the city of Cincinnati agreed to pay Mr. Isham and Mr. Edwards a total of $151,000, as well as issue an official apology and implement implicit bias training for all city employees. Overall, Officers Valentino, Knox, and Pete get an F for detaining Mr. Isham and Mr. Edwards without considering the legitimacy of their alibi, conducting an illegal search of the two men, and negligently conducting an investigation by allowing Mr. Brannigan to remain on the scene. Far too often do law enforcement officers abandon the objective obligations of an investigation in favor of the information that they received first, especially if it came from a retired police officer. An investigation hinges on the acquisition of clues and the equal consideration of all aspects of the scenario in question. Mr. Edwards gets an A- and Mr. Isham gets an A+. Although both men composed themselves relatively well during this encounter, Mr. Isham was extremely collected and remained silent as much as possible. Mr. Edwards was fairly calm for being unexpectedly held at gunpoint, but he was certainly more vocal about his disdain for the officer's actions and chose not to invoke his right to remain silent. This type of behavior can often lead to further instigation and sometimes can result in a loss of life or lawsuit due to the reckless nature of emotionally charged speech. It is always best to remain silent as much as possible